favorite memory of Rotary is the reason Rotary made a difference to me and to people I involved with was fellowship. Prior to joining Rotary, I'd been approached by other service clubs and had declined, even though I've done a lot of volunteer work. And Rotary to me embodied the idea, to get a little nostalgic, founded by Paul Harris, which was based on the principle you went out of your way to meet people from different walks of life. And that's what we did when we chartered the club. Less than 30 people. Some of them I had known before, some I hadn't, but for sure the memory is the fellowship of the individual members. Well, to know Jerry Levasseur is to understand, as I used to say to him, benevolent dictatorship. And actually, I don't know if people aware of it, Jerry tried to start the club approximately 8 to 12 months before we chartered. And Jerry owned many businesses in town, and I think sent a memo out to some of his employees, and thou shalt be a Rotarian. And we went to that first meeting at this Grove Motor Inn, and I can't tell you specifically why we never got off the ground. But Jerry believed in Rotary, and to his credit, supported by some other individuals, and again, basically through his strong will, kept with it, probably sent out a few memos to a few more employees, and lo and behold, we were off and running. And I think one of the embodiments was the fellowship between Ken Zender, who owned a competing car dealership to Jerry, and Ken was our first president. The district governor was a guy named Bill Gant. And when he finally got out to meet us, we acknowledged that we made up our own rules and really hadn't followed any protocol. And one of the reasons was, of all the charter members, only one was a Rotarian, Ken Zender. So quite frankly, other than having fun, we had no clue what we should be doing and kind of made it up as we went along. Many of us had contact with Rotarians before our charter. Personally, I had gone to many a Rotary event of the, it's changed its name, but it was at the old Edmonton Club, and I had a sense of Rotary. And the Mayfield Club, of course, like many clubs who was looking to create clubs in Spruce Grove, was the obvious choice. And quite frankly, it was a seamless process. It just, when we finally had enough charter members, it just happened, and we went on from there. The famous boat. Yes, it was an ambitious raffle, and I can't remember exactly the cost. I think it was $200 a ticket. And I remember, and I can't remember where I went to some trade fair or someplace selling these. And if memory serves me, I phoned most of my clients and suggested they buy one. But I think that was part of the fabric of the club, that we wanted to start off at a higher level and not, because we realized we had to create revenue. Well, I think one of the things the Rotarians understand, because most of us in those days were fairly independent business owners, managers, so you understood this wasn't going to be a quick solution. Again, many members stepped up to lead on the construction and design. So I think the main thing was perseverance. And we just had some people that said we were going to do this. I think one of the early discussions was the future of the park. And I know we had learned from other clubs that the park was considered to be expanded to provide, for instance, camping facilities, which would be a source of revenue for Rotary. But there was no doubt a commitment by the entire club to get it done because we wanted to have a symbol in Spruce Grove that Rotary was there. Very early, when we looked at the 4 divisions, international, community, club, and vocational, I think we understood very quickly that all 4 were important. And so on the community side, because many of us, of course, were involved in other aspects of Spruce Grove, decided the Rotary Park would be essential. And fortunately enough, again, Jerry Lavaseur had a chap working for him called Henry Boychuk, who took it upon himself, and I'm not sure the mechanics, to find, I believe it was a Wild Rose grant. And also, many of us had been involved with the chamber. I was past president, as was Jim Petty. So it seemed a natural thing that we as Rotarians would help the chamber and the city get this park and tourism off the ground. And one of the real benefits of the clubhouse was that, at least, and I'm not sure when it ended, many of our executive meetings were in the little boardroom, and a lot of good meetings. Many of us from day one believed that the essence of Rotary was humor. You only have to look around at the community needs, the international needs. There's a lot of serious things going on. You know, in our own backyard, people having problems. So, right or wrong, we adopted, many of us, that humor had to dominate. Before I get to the election, I think it was summarized between the club and myself when I did my first classification in the old part of the hotel. Unknowns to me, I was introduced, went to the front to start my classification, whereupon on cue the entire members of Rotary all stood up and left the room. Not a person was left. A few minutes later they all returned, and I said, "And in conclusion." And I think that was kind of, at least my couple mentors of mine had always said, again, featuring on the humor. We had obviously picked the executive way before, and many of the members of the executive we knew, and we had identified our platform, so we thought we should have some fun. I, quite frankly, honestly thought Fred the Goat would win, and I still think the election was rigged because I voted 4 times for Fred the Goat. And that is the truth. I don't think the people we had in our executive that we did anything other than a continuity of a commitment to several projects. We definitely were interested in developing certainty for revenue. There were lots of discussions about new projects, but again, featuring on the 4 areas of service to ensure that we met the president's test, which was, 2 per thing. And one of the things we wanted to be careful was not trying to do too much. We had been, at the leadership at the Pets and Sets, being warned about burnout. And one of the things that I believed in, both at the Chamber of Commerce and in Rotary, was looking after the members, making sure they had fun. Well, it can't be mythology because we're all Rotarians, and it's got to be the truth. Again, it was kind of interesting because on the first executive, I was asked to find a major fundraiser. And I knew a chap named Dick Fowler, who eventually was Judge Dick Fowler in St. Albert. And they had a modest lobster event. And I got a hold of their people, and they showed me their budget, and they showed me their source of lobster. So I went to the executive, and the executive turned us down. They said, this just doesn't sound like something that we want to do. So we actually went out, there's a couple of us went out and looked at other events. Raffles had their place. But we also wanted an event that eventually would become part of Rotary's giving back to the community, which I think it has by the number of people that go. So we went back, the executive approved it, and for about 6-8 months, because we started at least 8-9 months ahead of time, and again with some really good people, we divided it up into areas of responsibility. And every week we jokingly stood up and said, the lobster has contacted us, they're looking forward to the trip. Then we had jokes, the lobster can't make it. And then of course at 11:30 a.m. on the Saturday of the lobster, the very first one, the phone rang in my house. And there was something about the phone call that it just sounded eerie. And it was a chap named Mike Yakimchuk who had worked for Dick Fowler, who had arranged the lobster. And for reasons that can only be attributed to Air Canada, they decided they would store the lobster in Toronto and ship them out later on Saturday. Which of course meant they wouldn't arrive. So at noon I went into the curling rink where we were and met with the committee, and they thought I was joking because of what we did, and I said no. And I said, well, we have 3 choices. We can go out and try to buy 200 lobster at Safeway. Can't. We can substitute lobster, which didn't sound. And I can't remember how the idea was collective or individual, said, well, let's just serve them when they get here. And again, this is well before cell phones. And so long story short, our people got on the phone. Air Canada shipped them to International Airport. We had couriers arriving. And I think at about 9:30, I walked throughout the curling rink with a live lobster in my hands, giving it a big kiss. And thus the idea that it became dessert. The irony and the humor of it was that for years afterwards I was a guest speaker at District on how to arrange unique fundraising events. Well, I think, again, during our year club was important because without looking after your members, you're nothing. And we were very fortunate. We had very low turnover in a few years, and we were warned that would happen. So I think club initially, in my first years of Rotarian, was probably the most important. Community was interesting to me, but I had done other community work through other organizations. Vocational, because of the principles of Rotary, telling people what each service does. And I guess halfway through maybe my thing, international started, because what really makes Rotary unique is it's international. And I knew in the club that there was debate between whether we're doing too much international and not enough community. But I think it changed throughout the years. When I became president of the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber was adrift, and we deliberately took steps to reduce membership. And I was president for 2 years. We spent a lot of time saying, why would I be a member? And I think the number one thing you ask Rotarians is when you're at a meeting, look to your right, look to your left, look in the mirror and say, why am I a Rotarian? And there's lots of reasons to be a Rotarian, you know, from lots of things. So I think that's the message. And the other thing which I was proud to do occasionally was to provide reports to Rotary on the history of Rotary. And I think it's important. I'm a great history buff, and I think in order to know where you're going for the next 5-10 years, you should read history as to why Rotary was created. It wasn't created to be an international organization. It was created by people who just wanted one day a week to get together and share some stories. Well, law is, despite its complexities and all the things that we have to do, is ultimately it's allowing people to solve their own problems. And one of the things that we prided ourselves on, when I use the word we, was myself and the team I worked with in the law, is we were solution orientated. And when people have a chance to step back and look at clarity without emotion, usually they know what the solution is. So I think there were a couple of challenges during Rotary, both when I was president, in other words, where there were some issues, and I think what it taught is to diffuse them, relax, and usually I used to call it the 24-hour rule. 24 hours later, sometimes it's not a problem. So, because there was one moment, or if Jerry was here, I don't know if you remember, where he and I had an interesting debate in the hallway for about 20 minutes. And, but I think that's what it was, just the ability to relax, and leadership is about empowering the people around you to do what they want to do. Well, if you compare the Rotary, not only the four-way test, but some of the other service above self, contrary to sometimes what the public thinks, if you looked at the oath we as lawyers take and our professional conduct book, there's a lot of similarity. For instance, telling the truth is the essence of being a lawyer. And our oath says by commission or omission, we cannot allow people to be misled. We cannot pursue frivolous matters. Well, I go back to District Governor Gant, who kind of, at least in my mind, set the pattern. And he said, be aggressive, take on projects. All four avenues of the service are important. But if during your time as a Rotarian you can contribute, because people can't contribute for year after year, and I always reflect on one project we did in Rotary, our club, which didn't get a lot of high profile, but it made a difference and we saved lives. Bill Steinberg one day came and said, do you know in the province of Alberta that we haul medical equipment, blankets that haven't been opened, and put them in the dump because hospitals can't afford storage areas. At that time, through my law, I was dealing in Kazakhstan, and I happened to mention this to actually it was a Rotarian, a minister of the government who was in U of A, and to make a long story short, 6 months later we shipped 2 rail containers, those big boxes, full of medical supplies that were destined to the dump. In order to get the containers, we had to fill them with jackets and blankets, but we shipped probably easily $250,000 worth of medical equipment. We got a grant for the containers, and just a handful of us went out to a yard in Sherwood Park, and there's a picture somewhere of us having to use a forklift to close the doors because it was so packed. And this is important because I left my sunglasses in one of the containers, and if everybody gets them back, I'd like them. But seriously, 2-3 months later, we got an email from George in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and he showed pictures of an emergency ward before, which were cots, and he just said we saved a lot of lives. We should have done it again, but we didn't. But it was just one thing that all came together, and sometimes that's what Rotary is about, at the right time, the right place.